Welcome to the Exoduscry podcast, where we have honest conversations around exploitation, trafficking, sexual culture, and justice.
Today on the Exoduscry podcast, we're joined by Becca, Cary, survivor of domestic trafficking and founder of Hands of Justice, a survivor-led anti-trafficking organization. Tune in as she shares her empowering journey.
Becca, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for joining us. We're so grateful for the work that you do that is so focused on work with survivors. And I think having been in this for nearly 2 decades now, we have come to a place of just understanding how valuable survivor leaders are and how indispensable and essential and critical their leadership is in this larger anti-trafficking movement. And I just wanted to ask you about your work with survivors and what led you to establish Hands of Justice.
Well, it's kind of a loaded question, but I am a survivor of domestic sex trafficking, and I was trafficked in my early 20s for about 2.5 years by a gentleman that was significantly older than me. And it took me about 15 years after my abuse to actually self-identify as a survivor of human trafficking because, 20 years ago, those terms did not exist. So I actually spent about 15 years of my life believing it was an isolated incident or something I had caused or deserved. What happened was when I was sitting in a class at Sam Houston State University, which is I was taking a psychology class there, is when I was first introduced to the terms. And I spent about a year being angry that this was happening to millions of men, women, and children. And at the end of that year, though, it came to the realization that I really didn't have the right to be angry at anybody else for not doing anything because I wasn't out there doing anything either, and I had survived it. So at that point, this was in 2017, 2016.
I get that feeling, by the way, of like, why isn't anybody doing anything about this?
Right.
And then it's like, wait a minute, what am I doing?
Yeah, it's infuriating at the beginning, but then you're like, yeah, you need to look at yourself and be like, you can't ask anybody else to do anything if you're not either. So
yeah.
And that was a pivotal moment for me, realizing like if I want to see change or if I want to see certain services available to survivors, then maybe I need to be out there helping with that. So
that's great.
Yeah.
I want you to keep going, but I just want to just ask one clarifying question first. There are so many different expressions of trafficking. It takes on different characteristics in different situations, different geographic regions. And so there's not a like one size fits all situation that would say, this is trafficking.
Correct.
And I remember just in my own journey, the first story that I heard was about a girl who was abducted in front of her house, forced into a dog kennel and prostituted out of an apartment. And so that was like, oh, that's trafficking. And then when I started making Nefarious, our first documentary, I started traveling all these different places and realizing, it looks like so many different things.
Very much.
And so for those who may not be as familiar, could you describe the domestic sex trafficking, like what that involves or what that looked like in your situation?
Sure. Well, I was introduced to this young man by my best friend at the time. And I actually, looking back, I believe that he was grooming her, which basically was just gaining her trust and trying to manipulate her. And as soon as he met me, I think the vulnerabilities in my life at that time were significant. And they search out for people just like me. And so he immediately switched gears to focusing on me. Looking back, I can see that clear as day. Whereas at the time, I just saw him as a man that was giving me attention and the love that I had been craving for years. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that made me vulnerable to him to be easy prey, basically, is what I say. He had me convinced within 3 weeks of meeting him to move in with him very quickly. And it was very easy for him to do because at that time in my life, I was completely broken from things that had happened during my teenage years. I had survived a sexual assault. I had been through all these things that led me to just being in this place of complete brokenness and vulnerability. And Yeah, so he had me move in, and it was great at first, is what I tell people. But looking back, he was also isolating me from my friends and family. And when I say isolating, he had moved me into a one-bedroom trailer 40 minutes from civilization in the middle of a cornfield surrounded by woods. I mean, I had nobody. I wasn't allowed to leave at that point. Wasn't allowed to have any contact with my friends or family. And then he started introducing hard drugs and then rules into our relationship, like not being able to leave the place without him or making eye contact or speaking to anybody if I did. Just little rules. Mind games were frequent. He would show me pictures of my family and tell me that if I didn't start complying with him, that he would harm them. Pictures of them at work, at their residence. So I knew that he knew where they were. And then the abuse started. Things like, again, if I made conversation with anybody outside of work, he would lock me into small closets and starve me for days. And then eventually would start taking me to gaming facilities in Indiana. But then he would just run up a debt or owe a debt, and then he would just sell me to the nearest person. And that lasted for about 2.5 years. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it's not a gradual process of him doing that, but it was very effective the way that he did it, because in the process he would flip back to saying that nobody was going to believe me. My family early in my teens, because of things I had dealt with from my sexual assault, they had me institutionalized a couple of times, which led to, again, more vulnerability of believing that I was unhelpable. And then he would flip that on me and say later, like, they aren't going to believe you again. They're going to lock you away and throw away the key, and you're going to be stuck in these places for the rest of your life. So that kept me stuck in there, believing him, absolutely believing him that this would happen if I left and told anybody. So vicious cycle.
Do you think his actions were premeditated?
Yes, I think that there was women before me, unfortunately, and no doubt that there was probably women behind me or after me. I think about that probably more than anything.
And mostly tied to his gambling situation?
Yeah.
It's interesting, when we talk about this issue of trafficking and you like really, really pull back from a kind of like a more 80,000 foot level and look at it, it really does seem like there's some kind of organizing forces of darkness that seem to manifest in certain consistent ways. Just the idea of predation, the idea of exploitation, the idea of coercion. And so again, just going back to kind of what we started with, is that doesn't have there's not one single way to do it. But as I hear you talk, I, first of all, just thank you for sharing that. I feel so much. I mean, I can't imagine being in that situation. And the way you described the house in the middle of the cornfield, I was like, this just sounds almost like a movie, like just being put into some situation like that. But then also just thinking of the mindset of the perpetrator and just the importance for especially our female listeners and viewers to really know what to look for in situations that feel off, and paying attention to those signs.
Yeah.
Because to your point, we all just as humans have this deep existential core longing for connection, validation, to be seen, to be loved. And if that is not being met, the vulnerabilities there become significant. And yet it can get so bad.
Right. I like what you said, because I believe that, looking back, when I talk about the fact that he was grooming my friend and then he just switched it right over to me, that to me makes me believe that he knew exactly what he was doing. He was searching out for somebody that was an easy target, and he found one. And then he just used that to exploit it. But I think that's what they do. They know, they're experts at it. And sad reality, but that's the truth.
Yeah. I remember Shared Hope shared this quote from a pimp, and he said, guys like us, talking about pimps and traffickers, we eat, sleep, yada, 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 thinking of ways to find these women, exploit these women, and he made this comment that was just so eerie and has always stuck with me. He's like, they have no chance against a guy like us. And so insert, so many different situations of females who are in vulnerable situations. And it's a scary scenario. We live in a world where there are predators. And so my hope even in this conversation is just that as we get more into your story, that it will really help educate and inform people about, things to watch out for. So, okay. I know I kind of stopped in the middle because I think some people haven't heard that term, domestic trafficking victim.
Yeah, I always say that just because it's explicit that it happened here in the United States.
Yeah.
And we were talking about that earlier yesterday, that a lot of people still don't believe that that's happening here. So I always make it quite clear that I was trafficked in the United States, specifically in the state that I grew up in, that I knew much about. And it is happening all around us, so every day.
Yeah, like I said, the first story that I learned, it looked one way. People who have seen a movie think it looks a different way. But I think the common thing that we have observed is just the supply and demand thing, and that's pretty much everywhere now. So, okay, I'd like to just continue because you're giving some background for kind of the work that you're doing now. And I'd love to hear more about that.
Well, Hands of Justice came to be, honestly, when I self-identified, which is in 2017, I started looking for services specific to my needs because, as you said, this is an individualistic crime. It looks different for everybody, which also means their healing journey is going to be different. Also, the way that they cope with it is going to be different. And I found nothing. I could not find anything outside of a residential facility, which was not conducive to my life. I was married at this point. I was enrolled as a full-time student, and I was working a legitimate job at that point. So for me to go into a residential facility made no sense because you have to give all of that up to go in a residential facility. And I was like, well, where is everybody else going? I didn't understand that. And the more I research it, I'm finding that residential facilities are amazing, but they cater to a very small amount of people and small amount of victims out there. So the rest of them are out there doing life on their own after having survived severe trauma. And so I was like, let's create them. Let's look at individualistic needs and what we need after the fact and create them. And so looking back in the beginning, that's what we decided to do, is just fill gap areas, specifically for survivors who aren't in residential or who have graduated and need ongoing services. Because even if you've been in a residential facility, doesn't mean that once you graduate, that life goes back to normal.
Right.
There is no such thing.
Right.
And that trauma is a lifetime thing. And so we should be providing services that meet the needs long-term and sustainably. And that's where Hands of Justice comes in.
That's amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I think first of all, just very observant to recognize that need. And I'm sure your own experience playing a part of understanding how important that is.
Yeah.
There was a time when we did a lot of direct services, and there was a study that came out. It was a study conducted by, I think it was from a group of social workers, but it looked at the needs of victims of domestic violence and needs of trafficking survivors. And this group of social workers determined in this study that the needs of one trafficking survivor were equal to the needs of 25 victims of domestic violence.
And I believe that 100%. Yeah. Yeah.
And so for us, it really quantified the seriousness and the responsibility of what we were attempting to do in providing direct services, the need for those to be tailored, the need for a really well done biopsychosocial assessment, the need to tailor and all those because it's like one person has a child and what is that? And every situation being so different. And I think for us, part of that realization was there needs to be organizations like what you're doing out there that are just totally dedicated to this. And we really need to swim upstream.
Correct.
And stop this at the source because the outfall is so devastating. So thank you again, just for positioning yourself on the front lines to do that. Can you talk about your experience of building the organization and just the services that you guys are providing and what that looks like in real situations?
Yeah. So when we switched over to survivor services, I kind of used myself as my own model because I really didn't know of survivors out there yet. And I really just got out there and started educating, and the first thing I did. And the more I educated and shared my story, I would promise you I would meet one or two victims at least every time. And they would come to me and say, this is what I need. And it's always different than the person before them and after them. So I decided economic empowerment, which a lot of people are always like, what does that mean? Economic empowerment. And I'm like, it means everything to a survivor. It's everything after the life. Like, a lot of these people have no idea how hard it is to reintegrate back into society, to get a job, to get a safe, secure residence, especially if they have background that depicts, any kind of criminal charges. How are they able to get a job that's sustainable? How are they able to be in a safe environment where they don't feel unsafe, which is one of the number one things that these women and men need in the beginning, is the sense of safety. A lot of them have dreams. They want to go back to college or they want to get a GED, but if they have a criminal record again, they can't get a loan, they can't get a scholarship, they can't get anything to help them move forward. So honestly, as a society, we are setting them up for failure. So our services come in and just offer them the things that they need. Scholarships without a question. Just saying, if you identify as a survivor and you're wanting to get a GED or go to college or get a certification, we're going to help you do that.
That's awesome.
Helping with job skills, helping with life skills. Simple things like boundary classes, because every one of our boundaries has been violated at some point. Yeah, they have to relearn all of that. Helping with sustainable jobs, working with employees and landlords to understand that just because they might have a certain background doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be awful employees. Or, in fact, we have found that survivors will give 150% within their jobs because they want that chance at a new life. And if we just give that chance to them, then, they're going to be proved wrong pretty much all the time.
I remember when we were in a similar situation of trying to, in providing advocacy for trafficking survivors, one of the things is employment, like just for sustainability, and especially if they have a child and, there's real needs as they transition into the real world. And so we reach out to a number of businesses, even Christian-owned businesses, who had said, we would like to help. And then, would try to connect these women to jobs. And the response was, oh, well, we, need people who have experience in this position or things like that. And just the apathy or the reticence in the larger community to provide those on-ramps for people was really discouraging, because we're aware, like, we can't do everything, like that. It takes a tribe, and so I think just on that front, like, I hope that there continues to be a change of heart.
Yeah.
I know in our experience, one of the things that we were dealing with is just that sometimes, because of the way that trafficking sometimes gets handled here in the U.S., is these women end up with a criminal record.
Correct.
And so people see a person with a criminal record.
That's all they see.
Yeah. As opposed to a victim. So I think we have a lot of work to do to expunge those criminal records, to change mindsets and laws, and also we need the participation of, like, local businesses to play their part in giving an opportunity to these girls. I'm curious, in your guys' experience, how that has gone for you, and just even across the board, where have been the greatest challenges and where have you seen some breakthroughs and successes?
I would say that has been a challenge. we're breaking through some of those barriers, though. We have some large organizations within Houston that are now offering on-the-job training for these men and women. And then once they have finished this training, they are offered a job. But it has taken someone like me to go in and educate them and sit down with them and literally say, all we need is a program that is going to give them a chance. And on the job training is a big one, as you said, because they don't have the experience some of the times, especially in jobs that are going to be sustainable long term. And so we need that partnership to be able to train them and then offer a job. We've had a lot of people come on board with that recently, but it has taken years for us to get to that point. Yeah. And the same thing with the landlords. Sometimes they just don't care. And so of course, those are the two main things that send an individual back into that life, is because they can't sustain life outside of what they know before. So again, we're setting them up for failure, and we need to work together a little bit better to make that happen for them. So we do have some big companies, and I'm proud of them, because it's not protocol for them to do something, but they have literally designed programs specific for victims to come in and learn. Yeah.
It's that slow, steady grind, just, coming alongside of the one and really bearing that burden with them. There's a lot of talk about like rescue, and there's even talk about like safe homes.
Yeah.
But the real work in the trenches is in all of these direct services that you're talking about. How has it gone from the standpoint of building support for your organization? Have you seen a lot of people, like specifically donors, who see and recognize the value of what you're doing and have come alongside of you guys? Has that been challenging for you? What's your journey been like with that?
That's an uphill battle all the time. And I think it's mostly, I want to say it's because of where we're located. In Houston, it's obviously the number one city now for human trafficking. So there is a lot of organizations that do what we do. We're about an hour north of Houston. So we're out of that a little bit enough. But
where is that? What's
Conroe, Texas.
It's just there.
Oh,
literally last weekend.
Funny.
Yeah.
Oh. Well, next time you're there, come see me. Yeah. But I think, and then we were talking about this again yesterday, is that there's a lot of what feels like competition when it comes to getting funding, specifically for anti-trafficking. And then we are pretty new in the area where we're at, because we just opened in 2022 our center there. And I think getting the word out that what we do is completely different than the organizations in Houston. Most of them don't offer what we do, and they certainly are not survivor-led or informed a lot of the times. So yes, we have had a lot of problems with funding, especially because there is not much out there for economic empowerment specifically yet, which I find disheartening, because there should be. And then the other problem is the community can't really rally around us until they know that we're there and what we're doing, which is actually starting to become more known that we're there and then we offer these services. But funding has been a challenge. I'll share with you, we had our largest fundraiser last Friday. We had a certain goal that we needed to raise to keep our doors open, and we didn't even make half of that. So we're sitting there now having to scramble, like, what do we do in order just to keep our doors open to continue to provide services to these men and women? That gets to a point where you're just like, all we're doing is fundraising, and we're not out there really doing the services or giving the services that we need and working in the trenches, which is what I want to be doing.
Right.
I don't want to be fundraising. It's not what I am in this for, So a lot of challenges on that, I think, for everybody.
What was the goal you guys were going after?
70K was really all we needed, and we raised 14. Yeah.
Wow. So what's the gap now?
We don't know. We're right at about 4 months of funding for our center right now. I'm getting emotional because, it is a big deal. And it feels like a lot of the times we're always on the verge of that. And we just keep moving forward, and keep hoping for the best. And somehow God always provides, but it just gets to the point where you wish it was more than that. And that you could reach more people rather than just having to constantly ask for money.
I know there are so many organizations in similar situations, organizations who are really just wanting to do the good work, feel compelled. And we hear all the time people going, how can we help? How can we help? And there's an easy and hard answer to that.
Correct.
Like the hard answer is, well, like, are you going to become a business that gets trauma informed and hires survivors? Are you going to be a daycare that takes in the child of a trafficking survivor? Are you going to be a social worker or a case manager? The needs of trafficking survivors are significant.
Yeah.
If you are not, there is an easy way to help, and it is financially supporting the organizations that are actually doing those things.
Correct.
And so thank you for taking the risk to put yourself out there and really dedicate yourself to filling that space.
Thank you.
I think that we can raise those funds. So I just want to encourage our listeners and our viewers, hands of justice. Like, if everyone listening to this were to contribute something, we could meet that need instantly.
Yeah.
And that is what this is. It is, you are empowering the hands of justice. We've never done this on this podcast before. I just felt something when you shared that to
Thank you.
Put that out there. And so I would love for us and for our viewers and for our listeners to work together to help meet this need. Like I said, I know there's a lot of organizations in similar situations, but you're here right now with us. And I think we could do something to empower you guys and enable you guys to keep going, because that work is just so incredibly important.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I will tell you that every one of our staff members is an overcomer. We employ overcomers. That's our dream, is to allow them to step up into leadership position. I'll tell you that the day that I started helping somebody else was the day that I literally started healing. And I find that it's the same for them. And they want to be out there and doing it. They want organizations to utilize them in proper ways. And just having their voices in our organization means a lot. I would tell you that we're one of the only organizations that offers survivor-led support groups. Nationwide. We do this. They're all led by one of our overcomers. But what we found is, like, allowing these men and women to do life together has been life-changing. Mm-hmm. And so to think that would go away when we know that this is working is just so discouraging. But at the same time, we get to see the light and the faith that we have, that God always comes through in some way, just like simply you just doing what you just did. It means a lot. So I appreciate that.
Well, I think, sometimes I just feel that we need to educate donors. And we've been very fortunate in our own journey to predominantly be supported by a large demographic of very small donors. So first of all, never underestimate the impact of the size of your gift. When we came out with our first documentary, we did a campaign that was calling for what we described as incurable fanatics, people who would give up a coffee a week to donate, and I think it was like $12 a month or something like that to the cause. But enough of those people do that. And that's, really helped support our work to go forward all these years. And so the second thing is just that having been in this space for a while, and you meet these people, and you've met, I'm sure, so many, and you can't get their faces out of your head. You just want to hug every one of them, and you just want to make sure they're completely taken care of, and yet we're limited in our means, and so there's such a heart to want to see them supported in the way that they need to. And the thing that I just wanted to mention, and we can keep moving on with this conversation about this, is just that, for most people that I meet who find out what I do, immediately refer to some child rescue organization.
For sure.
And there's so much emphasis in the consciousness of people about this idea of child rescue. And it's not to say that rescuing a child is not important. Of course, that's important.
Yeah.
It's also such a very, very small part of this larger work. And there's a significant degree to which law enforcement is very much involved in child rescue. And so even those efforts are very collaborative with law enforcement. And so, so I would say, yes, child rescue when there are situations where children need to be rescued.
Yeah.
But we really, really, as supporters of this cause and of this issue, need to grow in the mindset of those children, those women who are rescued, then need clothes, childcare, housing, all the things that are going to keep them out of it. And so that's where you guys come in. And again, just in the spirit of educating donors out there, I just really want to encourage people to consider, as part of your giving, to support Hands of Justice to do this very, very important work. So, okay, that's my spiel.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
That's my story. I'm sticking with it. Why is survivor leadership important in the anti-trafficking space?
Well, for me, again, it's how I was able to find my voice again and start healing. I think working with the men and women that I do, they also feel the same. They need to give back in a way that gives them some kind of purpose. Not every one of the victims, of course, are going to want to go into anti-trafficking work.
Sure.
It is extremely hard on survivors when they do. But I will tell you, the ones that I do know, they do it specifically because they know the importance of sharing our stories. And without that, we don't feel like most people are going to be stirred to action because they won't understand it. Mm-hmm. But I do think we also need to talk about the fact that it is an extremely hard thing for survivors to step into this arena. There are still a lot of people in the anti-trafficking arena that do not want survivors. They will utilize them for their stories, and that's just about it. I was talking to somebody this past week and said, I wouldn't want a survivor on my stuff just because it would be too triggering for them. Well, yeah, but that's not necessarily a bad thing all the time. First of all, we don't want to avoid our triggers. That helps us heal. But at the same time, that's what keeps us going and keeps us motivated to do the work that we do. We need to remember. We don't want to forget. We want to utilize it in a way that's positive. And if we're not giving those chances, then what's the point? But also, if you're not listening to the very clientele that you're trying to help, then you shouldn't be in this work, period.
Totally.
Yeah. And so I find that the more we give them the opportunities to step up into leadership, to share their stories, but also to be utilized in ways of like education and consulting and producing. And there's so many things that survivors can do. And just because we might have a bad day every once in a while does not mean that we are incapable. We're very capable. We just need that chance. So that's my number one thing is I want to give them that chance.
This is another huge point. I think the whole theme of this conversation somehow has turned into how to educate donors.
Yeah. Yes.
It's another huge thing, recognizing the survivor-led organizations out there that are doing the good work and understanding how valuable that is in this larger anti-trafficking movement.
Yeah.
And so, yes, when I think about like exoduscry and how our organization has taken shape, when I think about other important developments in this movement, it's all been survivor informed. Mm-hmm. And if you take, for example, Sweden, Sweden has developed the most groundbreaking legislation in the world to combat trafficking, in my opinion. And in the opinion, I think it's kind of the consensus opinion in the anti-trafficking / abolition movement, is what some call the Nordic model or the equality model or the abolition model. It's the same thing. It's a legislation that criminalizes the purchase of sex at a felony level offense, but offers programs and services to the women and decriminalizes them, the ones being sold. But a lot of people don't know the backstory of how that legislation was created, which is that Sweden went and interviewed people and listened to people who were in prostitution or survivors of prostitution for 30 years. And it was out of that experience that they developed a victim-centered approach and recognized the vulnerability of people who were in these exploited positions and the need to create criminal culpability where it belonged. And so when you think about some of the biggest developments in the anti-trafficking movement are survivor-informed, and which completely makes sense. And I know how important that's been in our own development and the role that survivors have played in helping us shape our approach to fighting trafficking. I think specifically in your situation, just, because of the nature of the work that you're doing, you understand better than anybody, like what is needed. And so, yeah, again, I think that's really, really important. I want to talk about When Silence Ends. What inspired you to write this book?
That's a good question. I think meeting and getting really close to some of these survivors. And again, when I'm out there educating, constantly hearing the whole myth that this is human trafficking looks like the movie Taken or something like that drove me nuts. And again, we're finding as we stated earlier, this is an individualistic crime. Every story is different. So I wanted to create a book that highlighted the difference of each story so that people can understand that this is way more complex and way more broad than what originally is out there in the media and the movies. And so sitting down, I asked them to just plainly state their what they want people to know about their story. And then we partnered it up with an artist, a local artist that could take their story and paint it. I mean, I love art of any kind. So I wanted it to be a visual book as well as an educational book. So on each chapter, we took the main subject, because some of them have more than one, main subject of that story, and then we put all of the facts that go along with it. So for instance, if it was a story about child porn and trafficking, we're going to educate on child porn and trafficking and what that looks like along with the stories. And it was very well received, and it's actually being used in the curriculum now at Sam Houston State University in the Victim Studies program up there.
That's amazing.
Thank you.
That's
I know.
huge.
I was really excited about that.
Yeah.
And then we got convinced to do another one, so it's coming out in June, hopefully. So yeah, we're proud of that book. We didn't do it obviously to raise money. We did it because we wanted to educate the community, and and I think it's worked. People can look at that and read it and say, oh, I see the differences here. Like not one story is alike. We have some commonality, but not anyone's story is going to look like the movies,
Yeah. That's so helpful and so needed. And thanks for helping to create visibility for all these different stories.
Thank you.
I remember, learning about trafficking for the first time, and there was just almost nothing out there. And I got a hold of a book called The Natashas by Victor Malarick. And I remember reading that book, and it took my initial awakening to trafficking and caused me to internalize the reality of trafficking in a more personalized way, in a much, much deeper rooted way. And I think it really grounded me in my own effort to fight trafficking. And so I really encourage people to get a hold of this book, When Silence Ends. Really take time, for those of you that have felt awakened to this issue, to deepen your own understanding of the individual stories of people who have been through this. And So thank you again, just for writing this book. Can you tell us about the Economic Empowerment Center you opened for survivors and how it supports their journey to independence and healing?
Yeah. I mean, again, it really is just a safe place for them to come. So when we were out in the trenches in the very beginning, we didn't have a place to go and meet with these men and women. We were going to them, or they were coming to us where we could, but we just wanted a safe, welcoming place where they could come and share life with other survivors. And that's the difference. It's not a drop-in center where they can come at any time. We have support groups there throughout the week. We have programs throughout the week, but it is specific. If they want to come up there, they're welcome at any time. Man, woman, or child, honestly. If they're a victim, they can come be a part of something. So the center really is just that. It's just it's home for, we call ourselves family. But all of our programmings are run out of this building. We also have 5 trauma therapists on campus, which is amazing. We partner with who they're known as breakthrough counselors. They specialize in trauma training, and they see just about every one of our clients. So that's another service we provide, is trauma therapy for them. So a lot of them will come up there and get that, and then join a support group, and then take a class, or, whatever they need specific. We also have a boutique on site, which is a little different in the fact that we don't take anything used. We don't believe that these men and women deserve anything less than brand new, like anybody else. And they get to go in there and pick it out themselves. We've had kids, 16 years old, that have been recovered with just the clothes on their back. So they can go in that boutique and get anything that they need for free, and they love it. If they're having a bad day, that's the room that we stick them in, and they come out with a smile on their face. But something very small but tangible need that they actually have. We have about 3 or 4 clients in there a week that are just getting essential items that they can't afford because they've yet to find a job, or yet to find a place to lay their head. So we just are there to provide those things for them.
Do you know how aware others in your community are that this boutique exists? Is the idea of it that people would donate? Items, and then
the community has been very generous with that.
That's
we also
amazing.
do freedom bags, which I think you guys do something similar with the bags that go out and you take them into the.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, we are one of the only ones that provide that. We don't actually go down into the brothels or strip clubs, just not my forte, but we provide the bags for others to do so. And so the community is rallied around that too. We probably give out about 180 now a month. And moving over into other cities that aren't getting those services at all. But the boutique itself is open to, we recently opened it to maternity homes as well as domestic violence and the homeless, simply because we want that to be utilized. We want that stuff to come. We get so much brand new stuff. We might as well give it out to whoever needs it. So
there's a local church here that has something called the Mercy Warehouse. And they've been doing it for years, but it's a place where people can come drop off their used goods, toys, clothes, shoes, furniture. They have a large warehouse that they organize it in, but it generates millions of dollars every year, because people can go there and then buy goods.
Oh, okay.
And so it's become this revenue generation machine, and it's a great model because it's people, are just going to get rid of these things anyways, and then others who are looking for something can get it at a very affordable price, and then it creates this revenue engine to support the work of the church. So it's a great model, and you're in Conroe, so if you're in Conroe, what do you guys accept? What goods do you guys accept?
So just about anything. But again, we don't take anything used. So that's the difference. Yeah. But we do have a lot of church. They do what's called shopping for a cause, where they will take a group of women, and the women are buying an outfit for themselves. So whatever they buy for themselves, they also buy one for our survivors.
That's great.
And that's great. They do that quite often. And then a lot of other, it's an easy, tangible way for people to give. So we have just about everything we need.
That's awesome.
We do clothes, purses, shoes, everyday essential items, makeup, you need it. Because again, we have a lot of men and women that have donated clothes for interviews or court dates. So we just provide all of that.
That's so great.
Yeah.
That's so great. It's kind of that Mercy Warehouse concept, but tailored to a trafficking situation.
Yeah.
And if, just the idea of like creating space for survivors in the community center itself, I think is another like really valuable and important thing that you guys are doing. To be among others, who have either been through something like this, or just to find like support and access to services and things of that nature. I remember interviewing an expert in the field way back when I was doing Nefarious, and he talked about the recidivism rate of people who have come out of trafficking situations that go back into it. And I couldn't even wrap my mind around it at first.
It's ridiculous. How high it is. Yeah.
He made this comment. He goes, sometimes the abuse that we know is better than the future that we don't know.
Correct.
And I was like, ooh, to come out of a situation where you're technically supported from the standpoint of, okay, there's technically a roof over your head, you're technically being fed, right? To come out of that and face the unknown of where will I sleep? What will I eat? Like, who is out there? Think about it. Like, I mean, there's so many people in that situation and they just get pulled right back in.
Yeah. On top of that, they're dealing with significant trauma, and I explain this to the men and women, is when you're in it, you're in survivor mode. So you're not dealing with the feelings associated with it. You're just trying to survive. If you're lucky enough to get out of it, that's when the real journey begins. It is not easy once you're out. A lot of people think, again, life goes back to normal, but there's nothing. I mean, I've not met one survivor that doesn't suffer from some kind of post-traumatic stress disorder or anything complicated, addictions, something associated. And the real journey, the real hard part, unfortunately, a lot of the times is in the healing journey. And a lot of these men and women will not make it. It's just the fact, they won't make it because there's not supportive services out there to help them make it. That's why I'm saying I feel like sometimes they're just set up for failure when they're coming sometimes out of residential. You get them to a place where they can sustain themselves maybe economically, but not emotionally and spiritually and everything else that is going to keep you where you need to be. That's again the difference in what we do is we recognize that it is not easy and that we need a community of people. We need a village, as you said, of different people to walk alongside us. And if we don't have that, why would I not go back to something that's just easier?
Yes. I'm glad that you brought that up about the trauma, because that part I think can be overlooked. It's almost like this invisible force, but can be so debilitating. And you're absolutely right. That's such a huge part of this. And thank you for providing that value and that service and as a part of everything that you guys do. That movie Schindler's List always I've always felt just so deeply moved by that movie and the efforts of Oskar Schindler to help Jewish people who were in these horrible, horrible situations. And but there's a passage that is quoted in that movie from the Jewish Talmud. It says, "He who saves one life saves the world entire." And I think it's so true for those of us whose conscience has been awakened to help others. You can very quickly become overwhelmed by the scope of trafficking, but it really does boil down to what can we do for one person?
Correct.
And so thank you for providing an on-ramp for us to really help the one. And that's really, where it all starts. And so we've got to wrap our time up here today, but I wanted to give you an opportunity to have the last word. If there's anything else that you haven't shared yet that you'd like to share, or anything else about your work that you guys do that you think would be important for people to know.
I think I always want to just share with people that, again, human trafficking is not black and white. It is very complex, very complicated. And we need help. We need help. We need the community's help and rally around us. And there are tangible ways for people to get involved. And the very first thing I would tell people is to get educated. you can't help somebody if you don't know what to look for and what signs to see, and not know what to do. If you are educated, you can at least hopefully tangibly help somebody get the help that they need out there. And just find organizations that are local and get, see what their mission is and get involved. There's so much, again, that the community can do, and we do need the help of those around us. So. But thank you for helping me. I love what you guys do too. So
Thank you.
Nefarious was one of the first movies I ever saw, and it was very eye-opening, not only just for me as a survivor, but we make everybody watch that movie.
Oh, awesome.
We do. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for coming on. I'm really encouraged by the work that you guys are doing. It means a lot just on a personal level and also just in this larger anti-trafficking space. And we really want to do what we can to help you guys continue.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, appreciate you.
You can check out all our podcast episodes, articles, and films at exoduscry.com and join the daily conversation by following Exodus Cry on all major social platforms.